about the fact that, why don't we have this indictment right away? Well, I've been in a lot of courthouses. Jonathan has too. Laura has too. They're not the Apple Store. They're probably don't even have many scanners on each floor. So I have plenty of complaints about how the system works, but I do believe in it. I believe it's the only thing that we have, the thing that separates us from other countries, other places that don't treat the accused as well as the United States does. And in fact, that often is, me included, part of my closing argument at a trial, that we do live in a special place. And we empower 12 peers, sometimes more, sometimes less, 12 peers, regular folks in society, to come in and stand in judgment of another person, another citizen.
I'm told we have the first photo from inside the courtroom, and keep in mind this would be prior to the actual beginning of the arraignment. And there you see former President Trump, somewhat slumped over at the desk, appearing as a defendant.
And he's there with, by the way, his attorneys, obviously, including somebody who was just brought on within the last 24 hours, somebody who knows this district, Manhattan, well, somebody who understands what it's like to be, the charges and what it's like to defend a high-profile defendant of Paul Manafort.
Yeah, obviously, the former campaign chairman he represented for a time in front of a New York jury, and obviously those cases were dismissed, but he's a former federal prosecutor. He's the one right there on the left-hand side who's just joined the team, Todd Blanche, represented Paul Manafort on falsifying of business records charges, which is one of the issues we believe at the center of this case as well.
And so as we look at this picture, we may get more. I think 5 photographers were allowed in the courtroom.
So it was for the preliminary part of this hearing. He's seated. They were going to go in, take their shots, and with the extraordinary photo. And then they were told to leave. And as soon as they left, the hearing was going to begin. And the guidance we got was the hearing was going to go about 15 minutes or so. And then Donald Trump will be walking out of court and go down the elevator. Why haven't we heard anything about what's happening inside that hearing? Again, no cell phones, no laptops. There's no communication allowed, or you'll be held in contempt by the judge if you're caught attempting to use any electronic device to communicate what's happening inside that courtroom.
So the
before the hearing ends.
So the video camera is that sole shot we had in the hallway. That's the only one that's allowed in this
inside
process.
The building, that you're allowed on the 15th floor. The judge did allow for cameras to be in the hallway, the public hallway, but he will not allow a television camera into that courtroom at all, and still cameras just at the very beginning of what was going to be that hearing.
I can imagine people will see what they want to see, perhaps in this photo and body language, but it makes the statement more powerful than anything we've seen up to this point, that this is a president who's now reaching a new level of accountability. And faces these charges, which apparently we believe his legal team is now knows, now that this hearing is underway, but the rest of us still waiting to see exactly what these counts are, what the strategy was of the DA, and what they plan to build this case on.
A different photo here of the former president now from one of the photographers who was in the room. Again, prior to these proceedings beginning, you talk about accountability, Lester, and for Democrats, and we've seen reaction from many of them today as well. We've talked a lot about the Republican Party because of Donald Trump's grip on that party, because of the dynamics politically as it relates to the people who want to run against him, who believe that it is Donald Trump's time to step aside and let a new generation of leadership come up in the GOP. But we've heard from Democrats who I think will say that in their view, and another photo here, that this accountability is overdue in some ways. Of course, on the other side of the aisle, you have this continued drumbeat of the idea of political persecution. I mean, we're seeing that even from the head of the Republican National Committee coming out today and decrying what is unfolding as we speak inside this courtroom. Jonathan mentioned roughly 15 minutes long. It should be wrapping then by that timeline in the next 2 to 3 minutes here. They walked in right around 2:28. But here we see another image from inside of the former president of the United States seated in a courtroom in downtown Manhattan, facing now these charges, which we should hopefully know here what the specifics of them are in the next couple of minutes.
Kristen Welker, you're looking at these photos along with us. You've covered this president. Give us your thoughts.
Well, Lester, you can see the weight of this moment, I think, in Mr. Trump's face. And as I was saying earlier, one of his advisors said that from the view inside Trump world, these next few days are going to hurt. Well, you can see that playing out. I think that this is a heavy moment. It strikes me that we are standing here next to hundreds of protesters, Lester, but from the moment that the former president walked in to face this indictment, I have to tell you, it's been quite quiet outside of the courthouse. It's been somber. And I think that reflects really the mood of the country right now. This is a somber moment as we watch the first former U.S. president face an indictment, face criminal charges. Now, Hallie talked about Democrats who are weighing in. The one person who's not weighing in right now is President Biden. And Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was just asked about that. Why would he weigh in, for example, on January 6th and not this moment? She said January 6th was just a different moment. It just was. It was something that was incredibly devastating. People died on that day. And then in talking about this moment, she said, we know that Americans still very much care about this when it comes to a criminal investigation like this that is ongoing. We are just not going to comment. But Lester, the question becomes, does President Biden need at some point to weigh in on this, if only to defend the legal proceedings here as they are being attacked by the former president and by his supporters? But again, I think you see in Mr. Trump's face, in those who are sitting around him, the weight and the gravity of this moment that has ripple effects across this entire country.
All right, Kristen, thanks. So we have Chuck Rosenberg. Yep. I wanted to bring Chuck, if I can bring you into the conversation as we await the ending of this arraignment and the first bit of information about the indictment itself. You, as a prosecutor, you must go into a case. I can only imagine feeling 100% sure in your case. There's been a lot said about this indictment and what we don't know and what it might be and whether it's an untested legal theory. Is it hard for you to imagine a prosecutor under such scrutiny already to come in with a case that appears weak from the get-go?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've been 100% sure of anything in my life, Lester, but I can tell you this. The standard that you need to prevail in court as a prosecutor is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard in the law. The standard you need to obtain an indictment is probable cause, one of the lowest standards in the law. And so that gulf between those two things, between probable cause to indict and proof beyond a reasonable doubt to convict, that's where prosecutors make their money. And they don't make a lot, by the way. You have to have a degree of certainty. You have to have faith in the investigation. You have to trust in your witnesses. You have to have credible evidence that corroborates your witnesses. You have to believe you're going to win, or I don't believe it's appropriate to bring a case. You don't bring a case just because you're curious as to what the jury will do. You trust in it, you believe in it, and therefore I believe it's ethical to go forward. But 100% certainty, I'd be very surprised if any prosecutor told you they were 100% certain about each and every one of their cases. That said, prosecutors win an overwhelming percentage of their cases, but jurors are entitled to speak for the justice system in court. And sometimes they see it differently than we saw it. And that doesn't make us wrong or right, frankly. The jurors have the final say, and as prosecutors, we respect that. The fact that they see something differently than we do, Lester, is okay. It's part of the system. I will say this. I just want to make one comment about the rule of law, if that's okay with you.
Sure, of course.
You know, and Danny addressed it, and I just wanted to supplement it. I think he addressed it well and thoughtfully. The rule of law is a construct. You know, here's an NBC mug. If I were to drop this, it would hit the ground because the law of gravity applies everywhere and all the time. But the rule of law doesn't. And there are many, many, many countries around the world that don't enjoy the rule of law. But it's a construct. We built it, and if we're not careful with it because it's a precious commodity, we can lose it. So far, I believe the courts have done a magnificent job. We saw that in the run-up to the, in the run-up to the election, post-election, since January 6th, and again today, I think you're going to see the same thing. courts around the country, state and federal, conducting themselves in a thoughtful, dignified, professional manner and upholding this really precious thing that we have, the rule of law.
What do you imagine there is to learn for the DA, the prosecutor in this case, from Mr. Trump's other legal experiences, his tendency to kind of try to delay the process? What might they take away from it?
Not much, and here's why I say that. Almost all of Mr. Trump's other legal experiences have been in the civil litigation realm. And there, unfortunately, a well-heeled defendant can wear down, or a well-heeled plaintiff, I should say, either way, can wear down the other side. Criminal cases are different things, right? They have their own life cycle, and you can't continuously delay, particularly if you have a good judge presiding, as we apparently have with Judge Merchan. So I'm not sure that the prosecutors ought to look at Mr. Trump's history in the civil litigation realm and draw much from it, one way or the other, because living in a criminal case is very different than living in a civil case.
All right, I want to go right to Kristen Welker outside the courtroom. We are getting word now of that indictment that has been unsealed. Kristen, what can you tell us?
Lester, I'm just going to read this note that we just got from Adam Reese, who is inside the courthouse. Let me read it to you. Former President Trump pleads not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records related to hush money payments in the 2016. Former President Donald Trump pleaded not guilty in a Manhattan courtroom, again, to 34 counts of falsifying business records and conspiracy for his alleged role in hush money payments to 2 women toward the end of his 2016 presidential campaign. The indictment, the first against a former president, was unsealed in a brief proceeding before Judge Merchan. So again, Lester, Mr. Trump pleading not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records. Obviously, Laura and Danny will have the ins and outs of what this means. But again, this is significant, this is historic, and it is unprecedented. And we now know that Mr. Trump has seen the charges against him, and he has pleaded not guilty, Lester.
Danny, first thoughts.
Conspiracy, very significant. Conspiracy is a very effective tool used by prosecutors to charge groups of people and hold them accountable for all acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. But the big question now arises, who is the conspiracy with? Because a conspiracy involves 2 or more people who agree to engage in some kind of criminal act, some unlawful objective. If you were betting, the most likely co-conspirator might be Michael Cohen, who's not charged in this indictment, but he might be one of the alleged co-conspirators. We don't know yet, but it could also be a signal that maybe the DA didn't use federal election law as that predicate to boost this case from misdemeanor land up to a felony. Just as a quick recap, the falsification of business records statute in New York is a default misdemeanor. However, if the falsification is used in furtherance of or to commit another crime, it is bumped up to a felony. Not a super high level felony, but a nonviolent, I believe it's Class D felony. Think 3 years statutory maximum sentence, but no mandatory minimum. So if that is the predicate felony, if it involves conspiracy or something that involves state law, then there's going to be no way to throw out that at the outset and claim that, hey, this is a federal election law and therefore New York cannot enforce it. Alvin Bragg may have decided, hey, we don't want to try and implicate federal law because that's going to be a motion from the defense. That's going to make things very difficult for us, and we could lose. The bottom line is there's no clear answer whether federal election law can support the aggravation of this New York crime to a felony. So it could be the case that Bragg's office cast about for a New York State crime, and maybe we'll see it in the form of that conspiracy. Whatever it is, we don't know what it is yet. And as Jonathan said, most of these indictments are not speaking indictments. They're going to be short and plain statements, the bare minimum to satisfy what an indictment has to say. It's the conservative thing to do. Prosecutors are generally conservative. They're not going to want to put a lot of information out there that they don't need to. But the conspiracy, to me, very significant, but we won't know exactly what ups the falsification of business records to a felony until we see that indictment. We need a little more information.
We need to see what was the purpose of the conspiracy, who was in the conspiracy, what were the so-called overt acts. You actually have to take a step in furtherance of that conspiracy. You don't actually have to complete the conspiracy. You don't actually have to go through with it. You can just intend to go through with it, and we need to see that.
This references money payments to 2 women.
Yeah, which we have to see the charging documents, but we know, of course, Stormy Daniels, the woman who alleges that she had this affair with Donald Trump back in 2006. So this goes back quite a while. And then obviously Karen McDougal is the other one that's been publicly reported. We'll have to see the charging documents, but those are the 2 women that we believe were at the center of this investigation. Obviously, Michael Cohen paid the money to Stormy Daniels, the $135,000. The money that goes to Karen McDougal is actually structured a little bit differently. That doesn't come from Michael Cohen. That actually comes from the National Enquirer, which engaged in this practice of so-called catch and kill, where they would take negative stories and bury them so that they couldn't see the light of day.
They own them, but they don't get out.
Exactly. And so they're actually the ones who paid the money to Karen McDougal. And then they enter into an agreement, actually, with federal prosecutors some time ago, where they agreed to sort of bear all, if you will, about what all happened. And as a part of that non-prosecution agreement, you see a reference to an agreement that gets made between Michael Cohen and an unnamed person as part of the campaign, which, of course, we believe to be Donald Trump. But I believe these papers will probably spell it out more explicitly than we've seen before.
I was going to say, so walk me through. I mean, does this mean that they have gotten past this idea of an untested legal theory and they're more in, I guess, more comfortable waters?
We need to see the charging papers. We need to see exactly how they describe how they are elevating it from what is normally a misdemeanor to a felony.
The key is, are they using a federal crime? Because I can promise you the most immediate motion will be from the defense that New York State cannot enforce federal law. But of course, the question is, are they enforcing it, or are they using it as a springboard, as is allowed under New York law, to elevate this crime from a misdemeanor to a felony? The actual law itself is vague. Yes, it says New York law, but then it has like a catch-all provision that says any rule, order, regulation. So the question arises, is federal election law a rule, order, regulation? And of course, the debate can go on back and forth. It may be the case that Alvin Bragg felt confident that, yes, we can, maybe we're not enforcing federal election law, but we can use it under New York law to make this misdemeanor, an otherwise misdemeanor, into a felony, and we'll take our chances with the defense's motion. Or it could be instead that they decided to make it as airtight as they could and find a New York state law, let's say a tax law, let's say New York State's equivalent of RICO. And RICO is just a statute, to boil it down, that criminalizes making an organization or a corporation a criminal. In other words, using an organization or a corporation to do the crimes and insulate the individual humans that are in that corporation. So that's what RICO does, and New York has a version of that. They could have used that. They may have even proceeded with an extortion theme. That was something tossed around by Mark Pomerantz in his book, that maybe if you look at Stormy Daniels as the extortioner, and I'm just being figurative here, hypothetically, if Stormy Daniels was extorting Donald Trump, and that would be a weird thing because Donald Trump would then be the victim, but if she was, then this is potentially money laundering, right? Because money laundering is concealing ill-gotten proceeds, and in this case, extortion could qualify. But again, that wouldn't be a slam dunk either. So Alvin Bragg had a lot of decisions to make when it came to this indictment, and we're going to learn so much when we see exactly, or when we learn exactly what laws, if indeed this is a falsification of business records that is boosted to a felony, we're going to learn a whole lot about their theory of the case when we learn what exactly is the crime that they used to make this a felony. Because here's what I think we can all agree on. This is not 30 plus misdemeanors. Procedurally, that doesn't even really work in New York. You can't convene a grand jury to return a true bill on a bunch of misdemeanor onlys. So really for us, the key is what is in that indictment. We still need to know exactly what the theory of the case is.
We know.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say Alvin Bragg was in the courtroom. We don't know if he spoke, but we know he was there.
Right, and we're still waiting to hear if the hearing is officially over. But one question for Danny or for Laura. Isn't it possibly just simpler than that? Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to committing these crimes. And if Donald Trump is accused on the misdemeanor of falsifying records to help someone else commit a felony, the felony doesn't have to be committed by the individual himself, correct? It could be helping someone else do it. And Michael Cohen has already pleaded guilty to a felony. So isn't it possible that it's that simple?
But the felony that he pled guilty to is a federal campaign violation. And typically, that's something you would see federal prosecutors handle, not state prosecutors. And they passed. And there's a lot of debate about why they passed.
Yeah. Let me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but NBC News producer Adam Reese was just in the courthouse. He joins us on the telephone with details about the charges and about what he saw. Adam, take it away.
Lester, good afternoon. We all started at about 2:32 when the judge came in. Just prior to that, former President Trump entered the courtroom wearing a blue suit, a white shirt, and a red tie. He slowly walked past the reporters seated. He almost sort of ambled his way into the courtroom. He took his seat at the defense table in between his four attorneys. He was seated just in between his attorney, Susan Nichols, and Joe Tacopina. Todd Blanche, who was just added yesterday, was sitting at the end. He spoke on behalf of President Trump. Chris Conroy was the prosecutor, the assistant district attorney. He began by saying that there were 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. When he was asked, President Trump firmly said he pleads not guilty. The prosecutors handed over the indictment. They said it was unsealed at 1:30. In describing the indictment, they said that Mr. Trump tried to conceal a conspiracy and undermine the 2016 election, to identify and suppress negative information. This was covert and illegal payments at Mr. Trump's direction, directed to Michael Cohen, and the purpose was to suppress this affair and this negative information. He paid Cohen, and in doing so, he falsified those business records. He falsified it as cash. This was concealing another crime, a more serious crime. The prosecutor went on to say that Mr. Trump has made recent threatening emails and speeches, both directed at New York City, the courts here in New York, the justice system, and the district attorney's office. He said that these are irresponsible social media posts that threaten death and destruction and even World War III. He said that these public statements to the district attorney, which included a photo of him swinging a baseball bat towards the district attorney's head, was very concerning. They're concerned about this and what effect it will have on potential jurors and witnesses. But they said that this will not dissuade the office, and they're seeking a protective order regarding discovery materials. They're very concerned that some of the attorneys or some of this may be leaked, or that President Trump himself would use some of that discovery in a way that would compromise the potential trial. They began discussing conditions of release. They talked about how defense attorney Joe Tacopina had communications with Stormy Daniels, and that could present a conflict. In response, Todd Blanche, representing Mr. Trump, said that the people just spoke for 10 minutes. They haven't seen discovery. They talk about Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen has been standing on the steps of this courthouse revealing all kinds of materials that will be relevant in the trial. Mr. Trump has sorry, I'm just being moved here. They say that Mr. Trump has responded forcefully and clearly. He's very upset, he's frustrated, and he believes that this is an injustice. The hearing is going on right now. The judge said that he's taking the rhetoric and the language he's using, and he's very concerned about it. Blanche then said, well, this is free speech. He talked about the investigator, Mark Pomerantz, who wrote specifics. I'm going to have to toss it back to you, Lester.
All right, Adam, so just to be clear, I'm sorry, I lost you in my ear for a second. Just to be clear, these charges would be felonies then because he's citing the campaign violation, perhaps, finance violation.
I believe they're misdemeanors, 34 counts of falsifying in the first degree. I would defer to Laura.
Yeah, actually, let me.
If it's falsifying in the first degree, that's a felony.
Right. The first degree falsifying business records is a felony. So that means that we can divine that they are using some other predicate crime. Doesn't even really need to be a felony. So the big question is, what crime is it? So the theory of liability becomes he made false entries. But in addition, he violated some additional law, committed a crime, or concealed some other crime. And the question is, what is that crime? So that's the big question we still have.
All right, Adam, answer me this with regard to the DA's concerns about statements and actions and that sort of thing. Are they asking for some sort of relief or some admonishment from the court?
They are, Judge. They're asking the judge to make some kind of statement, some kind of warning. This judge is a low-profile judge, but he's very firm and he goes by the law. So we're going to have to wait and see what his decision is. But clearly, yes, the prosecutors want some kind of relief. They want some kind of, not necessarily a gag order, but something that will make sure that there is nothing that could influence any potential jurors or witnesses in an upcoming trial.
And the hearing is still going on, or is it over?
It's still going on.
So we don't know the resolution to that particular question. Can you give us any of the color of the room, what the former president's reaction was to all this?
As you know, Lester, the security around the courthouse has been very intense. We've all entered the courtrooms. There was one courtroom, the main courtroom, which he was in, and then there was an overflow courtroom. We had to go through two sets of magnetometers, one on the main floor and then one again up on the 15th floor. They cleared out the whole building once he arrived, and then they slowly let photographers, cameramen, and journalists into the two courtrooms. He appeared, as we expected, that he's on good behavior. As I said, he walked into the courtroom, he sat between his attorneys, he remained quiet. He did confer with Susan Nichols and Mr. Tacopina a little bit. The prosecutors arrived in the courtroom 45 minutes prior to his arrival. Again, security very high. I did not see any Secret Service agents surrounding him. There was one agent, or we expected maybe they would come in, surround the defense table. We haven't seen that. In fact, most of the security has been handled by court officers, and really we haven't seen many Secret Service officers within the building.
Okay, Adam, I'm with Laura Jarrett and Hallie Jackson and Danny Savalos. I think they may have questions for you, Laura.
Adam, thank you so much for all of your great work. Can you provide any information at all about how prosecutors described the actual conspiracy? Did they provide any details? Did they give a statutory site? Did they say anything other than just promoting the election, and that the purpose of this conspiracy was certainly to bury information before the 2016 election?
That's exactly it. He did this all to undermine the election, to identify and suppress negative information, that these were covert and illegal payments at Mr. Trump's direction. The purpose was to suppress the affair. He paid Cohen with false business records, falsified his cash, and that this was aiding and concealing the concession of another crime. And again, as I said, they went on to say they were very concerned. He wasn't afraid to bring up the threatening email posts and statements that President Trump has been making, both against the city, the courts, the justice system, including the DA's office. They're very concerned, not only for their own safety, but for the influence of a potential witness or a juror. These social media posts that threaten death and destruction and World War III, the public statements he's been making, the picture of him swinging a baseball bat towards D.A. Bragg's head. They're very concerned about these posts and, again, the potential effect on jurors and witnesses. But he said this won't dissuade the office. They're seeking the protective order. We'll have to see what the judge decides on that, as well as conditions of release. They want him to be warned about his statements. And as I mentioned earlier, they're concerned that Tacopina, his attorney, Joe Tacopina, had communications with Stormy Daniels, and he will likely not be able to cross-examine her if, in fact, she becomes a witness. That's certainly a conflict of interest.
Adam Vitale, I'm wondering if you can clarify or explain if the judge had any response to what you're talking about here, the idea that some of these threats have been brought up, not just against the prosecutor's office, but against the judge himself. And I also want to check on one point. I think I heard you say Todd Blanche spoke for Donald Trump, so Donald Trump himself did not say the words not guilty. Is that correct?
No, Donald Trump did say not guilty very firmly, but Todd Blanche was the attorney speaking on behalf of the defense. In terms of your question about the judge, he said we're taking this rhetoric and language that Mr. Trump is using very seriously.
Danny?
No questions for Adam right now. Well, actually, yes. I mean, was there any indication that the conspiracy was anything other than the hush money payments? For example, anything related to an extortionate scheme, an alleged extortionate scheme involving the hush money payments? Or was the indication that the payments were exclusively, the felony that we're talking about, the additional crime, is exclusively related to campaign finance law, as opposed to a state RICO statute or extortion or anything else?
No mention of that, no mention of RICO, but you do bring up a good point, which I want to bring up. There was no mention of the alleged affair with Karen McDougal. There was some speculation that the alleged affair with Karen McDougal may be wrapped into this case. And as far as what I heard before I left the courtroom, there's no indication that that's the case, that this is focused solely on the $130,000 that were paid to Stormy Daniels.
And we should note, we have not seen the former president leave that courtroom, so we have to assume, or based on what we know, that this hearing is still going on, which is considerably longer, I think, than anyone expected. I'm wondering, and I'll throw out to the panel here, yeah, go ahead, Adam.
That's right. I can tell you part of the reason that it's going on for a bit longer is because the first person to speak was a representative, an attorney for the media. And they talked about that this case has monumental significance to the public. And we understand there are competing interests, and there's interests of privacy on behalf of the defendant. But he's very concerned on working on a media plan going forward to avoid chaos. It's been a bit chaotic outside the courtroom. Outside the courthouse. You've got literally media from around the world, from Japan, from Finland and Sweden and Germany and England, and dozens from stations around the country. So he asked that we need to work together on a media plan going forward as we anticipate a trial. If the public is kept aware of what's going on, he asked, could we put people in the jury box so we can see some facial expressions of the defendant? Everybody in the courtroom is behind the defendant, so we can't see what his facial expressions are. And then anything that's involved with the court, any documents, anything as part of discovery, that's made public promptly. And again, laptops. We understand security concerns. This judge typically, he just handled the Trump payroll court case. He allowed laptops. The judge said he would allow going forward. Just this arraignment is an unusual situation. The security is very high. So for today, no laptops, no electronics were allowed in the courtroom. But he seemed to indicate that going forward, not only will he allow reporters to sit in the jury box if he can make it happen, but that laptops will be allowed to be used.
Was there any discussion of change of venue? I know there were no formal motions that we know of, but was there any conversation or anything said about change of venues?
Not while I was in the room, and that would be very unlikely. But we did hear that maybe there had been some suggestion by the defense team to move it to Staten Island, for example, which is another borough of New York City, which is much more friendly to conservatives and to someone like Mr. Trump.
All right, Adam Reese again, who is in the courtroom, has now stepped out, and this hearing apparently continuing forward. As you noted, there was a media attorneys there speaking about future access and video equipment. And perhaps that might have slowed down the process, but they are still in there in an arraignment where typically the guilty or not guilty, and in this case, the former president entering obviously a not guilty plea as his lawyers had anticipated. We will continue to watch that camera in the hallway. The former president did not speak as he was going in, simply gave a glance toward a questioner in the hallway there. We don't know on the way out if he will speak, but I think we're all struck by the DA's office bringing up this issue about the former president's behavior and statements and social media posts, the troubling nature of those, and the judge obviously aware of them. What have you both learned so far that in terms of the strategy of the state going forward?
Well, so far as it relates to the political sphere of things, it seems like, frankly, not much yet has changed. Now that news of this indictment and what the charges actually are has come out, we are already seeing some of the first fundraising post-arraignment, or I guess during arraignment, come out, and that is from Trump ally Senator Lindsey Graham, who has blasted out now his fundraising email. We've also heard from Trump opponents who have said that they have put up a billboard that will greet Donald Trump when he lands back down in Mar-a-Lago in West Palm Beach and then makes his way to Palm Beach, that says nobody essentially is above the law. So here we are again seeing sort of these political positions here. As Donald Trump, I'm also struck, it's like 45 minutes now that he's been in that room. He sat and listened to those media attorneys make their case. He said those two words, and I think that's important, and an important piece of color from Adam Reese here, that it was Donald Trump himself who stood up and declared in a court of law not guilty related to these felony charges against him now.
All right, let me go to Chuck Rosenberg. Chuck, that was an amazing report there by Adam, kind of listing out what he saw and witnessed in the time inside the courtroom. Piecing it all together, where does that leave us right now? As Hallie noted, we may not have moved much farther than we were earlier this afternoon.
No, well, in one way we have, Lester, because the arraignment initiates the criminal process with an actual defendant in the well of the court before a judge, subject to the judge's orders on timing and scheduling motions and the like. That said, I agree with Laura and Danny. We need to see the indictment to understand exactly how this case was charged. I will note one thing. If early reporting is accurate, that it includes a conspiracy charge, that gives a couple of advantages normally to the prosecutor. Conspiracies can run from a very early date to a very late date. It could encompass a lot of activity, and there is a particular evidentiary value because statements by co-conspirators that are made in furtherance of the conspiracy are admissible at the trial of this particular defendant, Mr. Trump. And so it's a way, legally and ethically, for prosecutors to adduce a lot of evidence if it really involves other women or other payments, even as part of the conspiracy. It also enables prosecutors to show a pattern of conduct. And the more conduct you can show, the easier it becomes for prosecutors to prove intent, something that's necessary to sustain a charge in front of a jury. So I heard Adam, in his good reporting, talk about a conspiracy. I very much would like to see that, how far back it runs, what the facts are as alleged, and who it involves.
And we will see that, I believe, once it's unsealed. Some of those questions will be answered rather immediately.
That's absolutely right. The indictment will soon be publicly available. We can all pore over it, we can read through it, and we can better understand what the theory of the case is. But based on initial reporting, it sounds like almost 36 felony counts. I'm not surprised that they are felonies and not misdemeanors. Danny spoke to that earlier. I'm not sure you would need a grand jury just to bring misdemeanor charges in a New York State court. But you're right, Lester. We will soon have have the indictment, and we can stop guessing and start understanding.
All right, Chuck, let me turn to Catherine Christian again. You wanted to weigh in on that protective order that came up during this hearing, or this arraignment.
Yes, well, Mr. Trump hurt himself by his own words, because typically in gang cases, you see the gang members who are being prosecuted, either they or their family members, start putting things up on social media, intimidating witnesses on social media, actually using documents they received in discovery and putting it up on social media. So I wasn't in the courtroom, and the reporter was reporting that the prosecutors were asking for that because of his social media posts, because of his emails. So they're asking for a protective order, meaning the discovery that they are entitled to within 35 days of the Supreme Court arraignment. They're going to ask Judge Michon to limit some of those documents from going to the team, because they are afraid that Mr. Trump will basically act like what we see in gang cases and start putting things up and stating things on social media, which would be very intimidating to the witnesses in this case.
So if the judge goes along, he'll be issuing orders today on that issue?
Not necessarily today. He could do it today, or it's typically you put that in writing. They have to disclose a voluminous amount of material, and then you seek a protective order. You say, Your Honor, we're disclosing all of this material, but we want to hold back this hunk of material, and these are the reasons why. So they have to articulate the reasons why. And also they could submit material, but they're redacting some things. So you'll get a piece of paper, and it looks like an FBI file, quite frankly. You start redacting information out of there because you're saying that we don't trust the defendant. Not saying we're not to trust the defense attorneys. We're saying we don't trust the defendant to have this material yet.
All right, let me bring back Catherine. Thanks. Let me bring back Jonathan Deans, chief investigative reporter for WNBC and part of our justice team here on the network side. You've been watching this play out. It's the speed of things is a little slower than we thought. But are you surprised that this protective issue, this language and behavior issue is becoming such a big part of this today?
I'm somewhat surprised. I think regarding the evidence and the discovery, I think it's often in cases like this and in other cases, judges put protective orders to prevent the defense or the prosecution from putting out that evidence as to ensure the fairness of the process and of the trial. So perhaps some sort of protective order on that evidence doesn't surprise me. What did surprise me was that Adam Reese and other reporters have been able to leave the overflow room and to make calls during the hearing in the public courtroom. So I guess they were able in the overflow room to come and go as they please, and the doors were not restricted as it is in the courtroom, which is why we haven't heard from Garrett or Melissa, who are in the courtroom itself, because they're in there. But the overflow rooms, it sounds like there was lesser controls, and so some reporters have been able to come out and make calls and provide updates while the hearing is going on, and that's what Adam was able to do with quite thoroughness. And again, just to be clear, 34 counts, falsifying business records in the first degree. My understanding, it can be up to 4 years in prison, but it could be as little as 0 if convicted. And remember that the Trump defense team is going to fight this tooth and nail and look to have these charges thrown out and fight it each step of the way. And Trump himself, according to Adam Reese, was the one who said not guilty in that courtroom.
These charges, good.
One of the things that strikes me about the protective order is if the investigation is ongoing. And that's one of the things I wondered if somebody will ask Bragg today at the press conference, is this it? Is this the final end of the road here? Or is it the investigation still ongoing? Because he had said at a time that the larger investigation into sort of the financial fraud issues going on at the Trump organization was ongoing, even though those prosecutors walked off the case. He said that investigation continued. Query whether it actually is, query whether they're doing anything on it. But one of the reasons you might want a protective order is if, in fact, you're still digging and you're still trying to get witnesses to cooperate. You're still trying to get sort of the pieces of the puzzle to come together. You want to protect the integrity of the investigation while it's ongoing.
As a layperson, can you help me understand the difference between a protective order and something that is more serious? In other words, how does that restrict?
Protective order is quite serious if you violate it.
It's not the same thing as a gag order?
The gag order is different. The gag order would be used to really protect the defendant's right to a free and protect the right to a trial and a fair trial. The protective order is to protect the integrity of the actual investigation and the documents and materials that they don't want to show up on NBC's website.
Well, would it prevent Donald Trump from talking about any documents and materials he's seen?
Well, we need to see the terms of it. And again, that's why I think Catherine is pointing out, typically you would make this request in writing and you would lay out exactly what you want the parameters to be.
You know, there's a lot of strategy here, too. I mean, this is the prosecutor's first chance to talk to the judge and kind of set the stage. And now I'm a jaded defense attorney, so take that with a grain of salt. You know, I may be clouded here. But the point is, this is the prosecutor's first chance to exert some control over the defendant. So why not put everything you can in front of this judge about all this defendant's bad behavior and set a baseline, right? Hey, judge, here's all the things this defendant is doing. Put him on a short leash now, and that will benefit the prosecutors. Here's why. If he violates, you can bring him back, and he'll at minimum get in trouble. At worst, he might even be remanded. He might even be put in custody for violating a protective order. This is chess, and the prosecution is playing aggressively early by asking for a protective order. It might get denied, but they've at least planted it in the court's mind that this is somebody who may be misbehaving and you need to watch him.
They're saying we're watching.
Consider the advantage. If he violates and he comes back and he gets remanded as punishment for violating a protective order, if he's actually incarcerated, which I don't even know how that would look. I don't know how you would do that. Maybe you put him on house arrest. Far more likely, put an ankle monitor on him and control and monitor him at all times. But every single encumbrance that the court or the prosecution can get put on a defendant inures to their benefit. The extreme example is that the statistics show that if you have a client who's incarcerated pending trial, the odds of getting convicted are just so much more because you don't have access to them. This is the part of the game. You know, and I'm not saying game in a glib way. I mean, both sides play. But the prosecution here is trying to get everything they can at every instance, and you can't fault them for that. They're here to win. They brought their game face, and they are coming out strong from the outset.
Here's another wider photo now from the courthouse that's been provided, one of the still photos. Let me bring in Chuck Todd. Chuck, if you can talk about the political implications, does this change anything? Does this enlighten us, reveal anything that may change the conversation?
Well, right now, no, but let me just quickly on this gag order idea or some sort of protective order for this. Look, one of the things they're going to, this was one of the motivations of why Donald Trump announced so ridiculously early is he was gaming out a lot of these scenarios here of being able to try to, number one, he knows that the Justice Department doesn't like to look like it's interfering in a campaign. It's harder to put a gag order on somebody who's running for office. There are First Amendment rights that come with that. So I think I had talked with Cy Vance about this off camera to me, and he said getting the gag order might be easy, figuring out how to enforce it, and figuring out whether it's worth trying to enforce it.
I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. We're seeing Donald Trump leaving the courthouse and not making any comments. There was a microphone there, and a reporter had asked earlier if he would say anything. Obviously not. This hearing, though, going on, as we noted, a little considerably longer than we thought. Jonathan Dean's with us. So what happens now? The arraignment is over.
One thing we would talk, at least up until a couple minutes ago, there was no gag order issued by the judge. I don't know what happened in the last couple minutes there, but as of now, and we'll wait to hear from Adam Reese or Garrett or Melissa Russo, who are in the courtroom, and they'll be coming out. They will not be allowed to come out until Donald Trump has exited the building. So he will now go down the elevator from that 15th floor. As you see, the caravan is now set up awaiting the former president, who is now an accused criminal, 34 counts, accused of falsifying business records in the first degree. He will be brought down the elevator, exit 1 Hogan Place, which is that street that is shut down on the side of the courthouse there. He'll be put into one of the SUVs, and he'll be taken to LaGuardia Airport, where his plane is waiting for him. And he will be flown back to Florida and Mar-a-Lago, where he expects to make a statement tonight around 8:15 p.m. Meanwhile, the Manhattan District Attorney, who had scheduled a news conference for 3:30, 4 minutes from now, obviously that is going to be delayed given the length that this court hearing went. So we would probably expect that to begin 4:30, if you will. That is in the building across the street. And he will come out and explain the charges. Now that the hearing is over, we would expect the Manhattan DA's office to email the indictment to all reporters. And I believe that was President Trump walking out, Hallie.
Yeah, that is former President Donald Trump now leaving the courtroom, walking into that motorcade. He will now be on his way back to Mar-a-Lago for this speech here. I want to bring in Kristen Welker, who's outside the courthouse. Kristen?
Well, Hallie, we saw some activity here with his motorcade just a few moments ago and thought that that might be a signal that he was about to leave. And so, as you say, he's now entered his motorcade. They are about to take off momentarily. Hallie, you can see the throngs of police here, the security here. The mayor of New York had said going into today that they were prepared for this moment. President Biden had said he had full faith in the police here to protect this space. And while there are hundreds of protesters, those who support former President Trump, those who are critical of him, gathered in a park nearby, Hallie, I have to tell you, they have been peaceful throughout this entire process. Now you see his motorcade, Hallie, taking off, departing as we speak from Hogan Place, from officially being charged here, pleading not guilty to those 34 counts that we just talked about. And so he is going to head to LaGuardia Airport, where he will head to Mar-a-Lago, as you say, and make those remarks tonight. And again, just to remind folks, Hallie, we expect to hear from a defiant former President Trump, right? He was sort of slumped over in the courtroom based on that photo that we saw of the former president. But I expect we will see a very different Mr. Trump tonight when he speaks to supporters at Mar-a-Lago, Hallie.
He has been traveling, Kristen, with a series of aides from his campaign, obviously with members of his legal team, many of whom are expected to accompany him back to Mar-a-Lago, where, frankly, the crowd will be, I think, friendlier than what he has seen so far in Manhattan. He's expected to be in front of supporters. It is entirely possible that we will see supporters there in West Palm and in Palm Beach, lining the route that Donald Trump will come back home. I think there is another key piece of information as we talk about the politics of it that we're waiting on, which is the indictment itself and getting some of the specifics that we've been discussing here as far as the legal implications. I want to note something that Jonathan Dean's talked about, which is, again, the extraordinary security measures that have been in place, not just today for the last 6-8 hours plus in an intensive way, but frankly, Jonathan, as you've been reporting and as you were first to report a week and a half ago, that have been in place for days now.
Yeah, for about 2 weeks now, from the FBI to the court officers to the NYPD, they've all been working and preparing for this day, and this day has come. And as you can see in one of the shots before, as the president was leaving, the former president leaving the courthouse, the lines of people rose deep to get a look at this day in history. I thought that was an extraordinary sight here in Manhattan. We understood that there were going to be a few hundred protesters, pro and con, in that Foley Square area in and around the courthouse. But the fact that for several blocks leaving that 100 Center Street area, that those sidewalks were pretty jammed with people. Now you see he's approaching the entrance to the FDR Drive, which will take him north towards the Triborough Bridge and LaGuardia Airport, where his plane is waiting for him. But the former president of the United States stand accused of 34 counts of falsifying business records and conspiracy, and leaves an accused criminal. He pleaded not guilty. And just an extraordinary day, and we wait to hear more from the reporters who are in the courtroom and in the overflow rooms about exactly what went on inside during that 45-minute hearing.
Danny, what do you think his lawyers are telling him right now? Now that they see what the prosecution has put together, they're saying, don't worry, you're fine, that there's no case here? Or is this the moment where you have to acknowledge that this could be a big deal?
I think what you'll find is that Donald Trump isn't as intensely involved in looking at the indictment as his lawyers are. I picture his team huddling around this indictment, parsing it out, although at this point, there can't be much that surprises them. Frankly, there can't be much that surprises all of us. When this indictment comes out, I really doubt we're going to see some crime in there that we never imagined, never heard a fact about. Consider that most of this stuff has been publicly known since what, 5, 6, 7 years. We've had the documents, we've had the checks, we've had the contracts. So I don't think there are a lot of surprises. Most likely, it's his legal team. They're huddling together. What do we do next? What motions are we filing? Again, they probably already figured that out. And Trump may have taken a glance at it, taken a look at it. It's kind of written in legalese, indictments are. You're going to have the dates of the conspiracy. You're going to have the different counts. But if you haven't looked at a lot of indictments, there isn't usually a lot of information in there that's helpful to a layperson who's trying to learn about their case, especially if it is, as I suspect it is, a bare bones indictment, not a what's called a speaking indictment, where in the modern era of Adobe and Microsoft Word, people insert photographs and charts and all kinds of different things. And you do see that in the federal context. For example, they might put a chart in of all the money laundering or structuring counts or things like that. And you might see that here. You might see a chart of all the different checks, the payments, when made. You might see that in this indictment. It's possible. But it's not the kind of thing that I think Trump would even interest himself much with. He knows the basics. He knows what he's charged with. He's the kind of guy that's going to say, lawyers, you handle it until I decide that you're not handling it the way I like you to handle it, and then I'll get new lawyers in.
And we noted he expanded his legal team only as recently as yesterday. We continue to watch the former president make his way to LaGuardia Airport. Let me go to Kristen Welker, who's outside the courthouse now that that convoy has cleared that area. What are you seeing?
Well, Lester, the convoy has cleared the area, but former President Trump's supporters are still here. In fact, there is a Trump sign unfurled, some of his protesters holding that. But again, this crowd is largely calm. They are somber, and I think it underscores the mixed emotions today. The fact that, yes, the former president is using this moment to strike a defiant stance, but again, this is an historic moment, the first former president to face an indictment. And his supporters, based on what I'm seeing here outside of the courthouse, really seem to understand the gravity of that, the significance of that. You talked about the fact that there is so much unknown. Legally, the path forward is unknown, and politically, it is unknown as well. We keep talking about this, the fact that in the short term, this may bolster Mr. Trump in the primaries, but it's not clear how it looks as the primaries drag on once debate starts, and if he is to make it to a general election, how that will play with independent voters, with women voters, for voters who voted for him in 2016 but switched to Biden in 2020. It's a real question mark, Lester, moving forward.
All right, Kristen Welker, thank you. We want you to stay tuned. We do expect to hear from Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, a previously scheduled news conference scheduled to start right about now. We'll, of course, take you there when he takes the podium. I want to go to NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Let's talk about what we can expect in the discovery in this case, the research, the grist of the case.
Yeah, so we can expect the discovery is really just the exchange of information. Any information that is favorable or unfavorable to the defendant within the prosecution of the case. The defendant would be entitled to that. So that's the prosecutor turning over anything from statements, probably from Stormy Daniels, maybe even Ms. McDougal. But there will also be potentially motions to uncover any of the testimony or evidence that was given to the grand jury. Keep in mind, the grand jury proceedings are secret, but there are certain rules governing the disclosure of that information. So depending on if the prosecution asserts that some of the evidence should remain under seal, that will also be a challenge by Trump's team, because reasonably they're going to want every single thing, testimony and arguments that were made before the grand jury that was relied upon them to indict.
All right. Again, watching this motorcade make its way up the FDR on its way to LaGuardia Airport, where the former president will return to his home in Palm Beach and deliver a speech that he has widely promoted tonight to the American people. That'll be covered, by the way, on NBC News Now, our streaming channel.
And Lester, you know, we're just getting the indictment in here as well. I'm reading through it as we speak, and I'm looking at 34 counts, as Adam reported in court there. I'm seeing falsifying business records in the first degree, which we know is a felony, and looking to see here how they outline, obviously, what the second crime is here. You can see it on the screen there as we're scrolling through it.
It's
here.
Automatically a felony, or only if they...
If they escalate it, if they find a way to step it up. That's what we're I'm searching for now to see how they describe it. It's pretty bare bones, a lot of boilerplate language repeated for each and every count there. As I said, 34 counts falsifying business records in the first degree.
16 pages long, this indictment is. Just to give you a sense, it is literally out in the last 45 seconds. So Laura is admirably reading it on the air. Yeah, live as we are getting it here. And it does not, I will defer to the legal experts on this, it does not appear to be that so-called speaking indictment or anything that is more further fleshed out, which means that in the next couple of minutes, when we do hear from Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, that would be his opportunity to elaborate on some of what our own Adam Reese reported went down in court. Some of the description of what prosecutors think, the idea that they believe he tried to suppress information ahead of the 2016 campaign.
Yeah. This, Lester, is the moment legal analysts dread, because it's when a document like this comes out. It's only 16 pages, but we're frantically going through it. We've only just gotten it, and we're getting a look at the first charges. And indeed, it is falsifying business records in the first degree of felony, and we should find out relatively soon what that predicate crime is that was used to elevate what is ordinarily a misdemeanor into felony land.
I'm going to let you guys go through that, and let me go right now to NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who was inside the courtroom, has just come out. Gabe, what can you tell us about the proceeding?
Well, Lester, this indictment is not a speaking indictment. I can tell you that what happened inside that courtroom definitely had a lot of speaking in it. It is unlike any arraignment that I have ever seen. It went on for at least 45 minutes, and it basically devolved into opening arguments in this trial. Just within the past few moments, we learned that the prosecution had wanted a trial date for January of 2024, just next year. Incredibly, that would place it right smack in the middle of a presidential election. Since then, the defense came back and said they wanted a little bit more time and wanted to push it back to the spring. The new information we have is that over the next few months, there will be discovery, and basically the next time of scheduled court appearance for the former president is December 8th, many months from now. Still, Lester, I can go through this quite a bit. It basically started with the prosecution laying out its case right here, and as my colleague Adam Reese reported, this is 34 felony counts of falsifying business records with the intent to, conspiracy to undermine the 2016 election. I'll let you guys go through the indictment. I have not seen it myself, but I can tell you that the prosecution laid into the defense, saying that over the past several weeks, there had been irresponsible social media posts that the defendant had said that there would be death and destruction because of this indictment, and that the defendant has also directed threats at the DA's office, and these threats led to increased law enforcement efforts. I was able to get a clear view of former President Trump. We had the monitor facing him. He was sitting in between his defense attorneys, and he was looking mostly silent most of the proceeding, only able to say, and actually this is Mr. Trump's defense team. If we can look over here, Tony. This is President Trump's defense team right here, Joe Tacopina. I'll continue my description, Lester, but let's see if we can take, you may want to take this response live. This is Todd Blanche and Joe Tacopina. I'm not sure if we have a camera there. I'll try to listen in.
We can see it.
Pass along what they're saying. I'm trying. Hold on one moment.
Get that cell phone back. Hey, cell phone.
Okay, we're trying to listen in. Joe Tacopina, attorney for former President Trump, is speaking to a gaggle of reporters. We're trying to get our microphone in there.
And it's not a good day. It's not a sad day. I don't expect this to happen in this country. You don't expect this to happen to somebody who was the president of the United States. And on the one hand, there's not really any surprises. I know there was a lot of talk over the past several weeks and the past several days about what's going to be in this indictment and what's going to be there that we don't know. There must be something besides what we've been talking about for the past 4 or 5 years. There wasn't. There's nothing. The indictment itself is boilerplate. It doesn't allege any federal crime, any state crime that's been violated. It doesn't allege what the false statement is. And it's really disappointing. It's sad, and we're going to fight it. We're going to fight it hard.
Were you surprised by anything in the indictment?
No.
How about you, Joe? Were you surprised?
Yeah, I was surprised there were no facts in there. I mean, normally in an indictment you have alleged facts. So they said that this was a false business record entry to aid and abet another crime without saying what the other crime was.
Can you talk about his demeanor? How was he doing?
Trump's reaction was when he saw the charges against him.
When you say what his reaction was, what do you expect his reaction was? I mean, his reaction was exactly what would happen if it happened to anybody that I'm looking at now or anybody that's hearing what you're saying. He's frustrated, he's upset, but I'll tell you what, he's motivated, and it's not going to stop him, and it's not going to slow him down, and it's exactly what he expected, and so to that extent, there's no surprise. But he's also upset and frustrated and disappointed and mad that this happened.
What about the warnings against his increased rhetoric on Twitter? What was the former president's reaction?
There was not a warning. What do you mean?
From the judge, talking about
the judge did not warn.
The
The district attorney made a statement addressing what they perceived to be, I'm not sure what the words they use, inappropriate rhetoric of some sort. Obviously, we responded, and the judge just took it in. The judge didn't warn. He asked the parties to consider what they're saying and not saying.
Guys, he did not admonish the president.
There was no admonishment.
That the president not use language that would incite violence or civil unrest.
He did not request that the president not use language. He requested that everybody involved refrain from using language that's inappropriate. And by the way, that includes the witnesses for the people who are talking just as much as the president.
The former president swinging a baseball bat at the head of the Manhattan DA.
Well, I don't know where you got that, because
that was a tweet sent out by the former president.
No, it wasn't. And first of all, that picture was not swinging a baseball bat. I mean, if you want to distort the facts, go right ahead. I won't address that. Yes, it is. He wasn't swinging a baseball bat at anyone's head. That was a picture of him showing off an American-made bat. Someone else put a picture of the district attorney next to him, and in an article posted that. That's not his article. It's not his photos.
Not using language that incites.
Guys, here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the insufficiency of this case. And I will say this to you. Today's unsealing of this indictment shows that the rule of law died in this country. Because while everyone is not above the law, no one's below it either. And if this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
What are we going to get tonight when he speaks?
When?
Tonight.
Yeah, 8 o'clock.
What are we going to hear?
I don't know. You'll hear it.
You should tune in and you'll hear it.
You think we know?
Wanted a trial in January. Didn't you think that was realistic?
No.
Can you guys talk about, there's a lot of speculation about the unity among the defense attorneys.
Look at this. Look at us.
Is that why you chose to do this?
To come out together? We chose to come out together so we could speak with one voice, but there is no disunity here. That's gossip and it's nonsense. We've been working together and we will be working together.
And this, to me, quite frankly, is the best team I've ever worked with, the lawyers. I'm honored to be working with these guys. It's a family, it's a team, and we have one mission, and we'll achieve that mission.
What's your next move?
I'm going to go home and have some food.
What about the change of venue stuff? When do we?
We're going to start fighting the case. I didn't mean to be flippant.
When do you start filing motions? I'm assuming one of the first things you're going to do.
The judge set a motion schedule
to dismiss. I assume that'll be
the judge set a motion schedule that requires motion files in 4 months. So that's when we'll be filing motions.
This whole notion about how this is sort of like a novel, or do you?
It's not a notion. It's actually a fact. It's never been charged before.
Talk about that. But
there's nothing else to say except the district attorney. This office has existed for decades and decades, and you can find one if you'd like. You'll never see a charge like this ever.
You understand
this case?
You understand this? As simple as this: a state prosecutor is prosecuting a federal election law violation that doesn't exist according to federal election law officials. It's as simple as that. That you could sum it all up like that.
Will there be anything else in your motion to dismiss?
We haven't even come
What about the
close to
change
the
of
size.
venue? There's all this talk. Can someone address that now?
The defendant could potentially post discovery on social media. Will you commit
Impromptu
your
news
client-
conference outside the courthouse with the attorneys for former President Donald Trump, who right now is nearing LaGuardia Airport for his return to Florida after what was described as about a 45-minute long arraignment hearing in which a number of issues were discussed, including some of the tone of language that had concerned the DA's office from the former president. But his attorneys strongly defending the former president and challenging the DA to come up with facts which they think are not in evidence right now. Laura Jarrett has been working this set of documents we've received here, the actual indictment, and
Yes.
help us understand what it says and what it doesn't say.
Okay, so what we have here is an indictment that's laying forth the exact counts. Those are statutory cites that relate to the criminal code in New York. That's what we have, the 34 counts falsifying business records. In addition, we have a lengthy statement of facts, some 44 paragraphs in length. So we talk about a speaking indictment. This is singing it from the rooftops, telling the story of what happened. And we're still going through it. But part of what's interesting is it's laying out a narrative in the language of conspiracy, but they haven't actually charged conspiracy as a separate count, which is interesting. And I wondered how they were going to do it, because we all knew that they were going to need some hook to escalate this to a felony. And their hook is laid out in this narrative description, but it's not actually charged as a separate crime, which will be interesting. And I'm sure the former president's lawyers will attack that and figure out a way to say that that's not a proper way to do things. But it is interesting to know how explicit they are about the former president's role in what they are saying is essentially a scheme to defraud the American public.
That he was an active participant?
That he was an active participant, that he had meetings about this, and that he did this for the sole purpose was to make sure that negative information did not come out before the 2016 election. That is certainly what Michael Cohen pled guilty to. It's certainly what the publisher of the National Enquirer pled guilty to as part of his non-prosecution agreement. So we have heard this story told before by federal prosecutors in those agreements. We have never heard this story told before quite as explicitly as we are hearing it today from the mouths of the state district attorney in Manhattan.
There are no names listed here in this statement of facts, because you're right, Laura, this is separate technically from the indictment itself, but it clearly lays out all of what we've been talking about, the sort of color narrative, if you will, of what happened.
Yeah.
But based on some of the identifying pieces of information that are in here, like the amounts of the hush money payments, it seems at this point that this is about Karen McDougal, who we talked about, and Stormy Daniels. Stormy Daniels, of course, an adult film star who just today is out with a new, essentially, magazine feature talking about how she hopes to feel at some point vindicated, as well as Karen McDougal, this former Playboy model, who also says that she received a hush money payment that came through, as Laura explained earlier in our special coverage here, that came through a publication, kind of a catch and kill scheme, which
Whoa. That is the story. You know, I'm not showing this for you to see that Trump is going to court or Trump is being tried. I am showing you to see what a state should look like. Not how many times in your life have you seen any your government
African leader,
ex-president, senate, ex-senator went to taken to court,
Yes.
arrested?
Yes.
How many times? Somebody was at initially. You should not tie your head and your hand inside the basket looking inside Biafra. Look outside Biafra and see what is going on and see what is happening. What do you really want when you get Biafra? This is the kind of thing. Nobody is above the
law. Just
this president to be you anybody. Place where Obasanjo instituted what in the I've forgotten what is that Oputa panel.
Yeah.
And Obasanjo went to the same Oputa panel where he was inducted Obasanjo got angry because he was asked a question. He said, how can a small boy like you be throwing questions on me? Don't you know I'm a baba? He left them and walked away, and he never went back there.
Can you imagine?
You set up a panel to try people, and you were called to answer questions. You did not want to go. You went there, you left. Who do you want to go?
Tell me.
Then when Obasanjo did not go, IBB refused to go.
Yes.
Buhari refused to go. All of them refused to go.
Yes.
We need a country where you lead by example. Trump, at the first place, at the first time, he handed himself over to the police. Then he was allowed to go. And today again, he came, he handed himself over to the police. He got arrested until after the court. We need a transparency, a clear, no be juju, no be say Nigeria no be for you. Although no, we don't want that kind of country. We want a decent, civilized country where if you want to embezzle people's funds, you will know that you are, look prison. If you want kill people in the secret, you go to know say, look me, look prison. If you want do road where be say if motor bicycle pass and breeze, you go scatter the road, look prison.
Yes.
Awarded $100 billion contract, you will do it to the standard. Not have standard and not have strength.
Not substandard.
If you want to say anything, you say, so we quickly close up if we wait for Simon and see if we can do any other thing, because there's a news we have to listen to. So go on.
Yes, thank you for having me, Nishan. Thank for all the Biafra that are watching the exemplary way of democracy, because I knew that when I saw the event going on, just showing it just for like occupy yourself on the live broadcast, but just to throw an example of democracy, that nobody is above the law. For Trump to go to court, surrender himself, being arrested, taken to court, and stand jury, it's a pure democracy. And Trump never kill anybody. Trump never sent fighter jet to bomb his own citizens, like other leaders are doing in the zoo. Trump had never, in any way, defrauded any institution or awarded fair contract or what should I say? Give secret award to farmers like herdsmen or something, billions of money to the private sector. No, Trump never supported any terrorists. Trump had not even in any way harbor terrorism. Trump has not in any way tried to marginalize any state in the US, but Trump just that he disputed the transparency of the previous presidential election in the United States. That's all. And just like what we are seeing now in the zoo, the presidential candidate of Labour Party now disagree and is calming his followers down, calming them down, though they're already on the street protesting. That's what the Trump these followers did in 2000 and is it 2000? No, this not 2016. Is it 2016? Yeah, I think 2016. That's what his followers did. You understand me? But it's not that they kill anybody, although there is some people who collapsed, but I think they were revived. But then, what is that crime? Even if some part of the building in that Hilton pool was vandalized, was it not repaired? And was it Trump that led them to that protest? No. It is emotional. Okay? So That's the same way Hillary Clinton's supporters did when Trump defeated her. They went to the street, burning road, burning infrastructure, burning everything, causing problems. Even the day Trump was sworn in, Hillary Clinton supporters as well protested, and they vandalized a lot of infrastructures in the city. But Trump own is what? Like a tornado. They see him because if he come back in 2024, he's going to defeat whoever that is a presidential candidate to the Republican and to the Democrats. That's why they are trying to stop him by all means, trying to formulate a lot of story, cook a lot of fabricated evidence to make sure that they harm him, to frustrate him, to just tamper his move to contest in 2024. But all the same, I give kudos to the man, Trump himself, and the system in the United States that proved that nobody is above the law. Thank you very much.
Yes, so Biafrans, we have to close this program to come again. We will see what the people are saying about Obi. Obi's statement, both the leaked audio telephone conversation, and we are going to see again the terrorists killed many, set homes ablaze, chased away communities in Kogi State.
Today?
These are the same people they have been living together with. Funanis, you cannot live together with them. They are the people you can never have anything to do with. They are not human beings. So we are coming back. Just stay tuned. As we end up this program, we're coming back again. Thank you for joining us again.